guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we will take a look at some new Just No HOA content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, For Whom the Booth Tolls. This one is ongoing. I rent. I don't like buying a home because it means I have to hold still, and unless I've got a committed relationship going, I prefer the flexibility. I happened to rent a property in a neighborhood with an HOA for the first time. Oh, boy. It has been nice not to mow, and they have built a gate around the community, but I'll happily do all that to be rid of this HOA. So would my landlords. 3 aging Southern women who have been the board of this HOA for 13 years sit on unopposed thrones and run the community like it's their little fiefdom. They hate renters, and it so happens my neighbor is another renter. They apparently ran off people who sold their homes to landlords, and now the HOA is discovering the FHA applies to them, and they aren't happy about it. After towing my car and my neighbor's because I once parked on the curb and her car was nosed just over the edge of her driveway, my landlord started looking into it. The HOA had been operating illegally for over a decade. The triumvirate, as I call them, had exempted themselves from over $8,000 in fees each, along with multiple other violations of the HOA charter. They had been calling meetings in secret and excluding the 4 landlords that owned structures there, doing all they could legally do to make things hostile to renters. What finally broke the camel's back was a gate. Rather than a normal gate that uses a keypad and is contiguous with the fencing, they installed a toll gate. To obtain a barcode to put on your vehicle to enter this gate, you must pay $75 per code to the triumvirate. People who live there and own their home get 2 for free. Renters get none, and their landlords have to buy one for themselves and one for the renter, to try to make renting more expensive. Alongside the gate installation, policy changes nobody but them voted on included that all renters required a thumbs up from the HOA on every individual renter. They want, illegally, the personally identifiable information and credit checks of every potential tenant. Finally, they reserve the right to revoke barcode validity at any time for any reason, basically saying, do what we say or we will lock you out of your own home. If it gets revoked, you have to buy another. The person running the gate and its cameras happens to be the boyfriend of one of the triumvirate. He gets paid $20 an hour. Lawsuits went into the air immediately from every single landlord. The Q&A meeting to clarify the details turned into the triumvirate getting angry, telling the landlords they weren't allowed to ask questions because of their lawsuits, so we tenants did it for them, and man, that ticked them off, and a series of complaints and holes poked into the whole plan. It's now to the point that the gate is installed and with arms stuck upward because the whole thing has been put on hold by the courts pending litigation, and people are selling their homes to the landlords. What sparked all this? Someone got shot near the entrance in a crime of passion, and the rumor mongers mutated it into an illegal substance deal and an interracial couple where the black one shot the white one. It was 2 white people, and no substances were involved. Next one is titled, Grass Measurer. First, several years ago there was a giant ice storm in Dallas overnight. A large tree fell in my backyard around 3 a.m. under the weight of the ice and knocked my fence down leading into the alley. At 6 a.m., I had a notice on my door. Dear homeowner, HOA Rule 102.4 requires all owners to have a fence in their backyards between the yard and the alley. You are in violation of the rule and are required to attend a violation hearing at the next HOA meeting to discuss penalties and potential resolutions. Me. What the heck? It fell over last night. I called the HOA to figure out what was going on. Evidently there was no leeway. No fence was no fence. So, I sued the HOA, the president of the HOA individually, and the chief enforcement officer individually for violating several state laws. They tried to back down. I refused until the entire HOA board agreed to resign and sign a permanent injunction against ever being on our HOA again. Second, our HOA requires us to keep our lawns trimmed. Most HOAs do. Mine takes it to a new level, or used to anyway. There was a little old lady with a golf cart the HOA had provided. Every single morning she drove around the neighborhood, stopping at every house to measure the grass. She wrote the heights in a little notebook. We weren't allowed to have more than a 200% variance from low to high or we got an automatic citation. Everyone hated this woman. Then she died from old age, about 2 years ago. To date, no one has agreed to become the next grass enforcement officer. Next one is titled, Lawyer Up. I often had to travel for my work, sometimes several weeks at a time. I bought a home in a nice, gated community thinking it would provide a little more security when I was out of town, but mainly because the HOA maintained the yards and home exteriors. These were chores that I often didn't have time to do. I worked for a company that provided me with a car, an Oldsmobile 98 with no company name, stickers, decals, or numbers anywhere on it to indicate it was a commercial vehicle. The only thing that identified it as a company vehicle were the state-issued commercial license plates. However, it did have a couple of antennas mounted on the trunk because it was equipped with a mobile phone, the old kind before cell phones, and a business band radio. But those antennas looked similar to the scanner and CB antennas that were common at that time. I always immediately pulled into the garage when I arrived home and then closed the garage door because we were required to keep them closed. I soon learned an older lady living nearby was the president of our HOA, and she took her responsibilities very seriously. Not long after I moved there, she walked over and told me the covenants prohibit commercial vehicles from entering the subdivision between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m., or to park there overnight. Then she said that I had to park my car someplace else. I explained to her that my employer required me to always drive a company vehicle, so they can contact me when necessary, therefore I didn't own a personal vehicle. It was my only means of transportation and, other than having commercial license plates, it looked like an ordinary privately owned vehicle. Besides, it would always be parked in my closed garage when I'm home. She said that didn't matter because the residents had previously decided they don't want commercial vehicles driving around their subdivision at night or parking overnight. I continued parking that vehicle in my garage while at home. The following week she had a lawyer on retainer with the HOA, and a resident of the subdivision, send me a large certified envelope containing a copy of the HOA covenants with relevant parts of it highlighted and a letter ordering me to immediately cease and desist parking commercial vehicles in the subdivision overnight in violation of the covenants. He also included an itemized bill showing the amount of money he was demanding I pay for his legal services, as permitted by the covenants. I mentioned this problem to my boss, so he had me go talk with the company attorney, his daughter, and show her everything they had sent. She listened to my story and looked at everything in the envelope. She then sent the HOA and their attorney certified letters notifying them she was my attorney and demanded all future communications by either HOA officers or their legal representatives involving or concerning the vehicles I drive must be submitted in writing to her at her office. Also, she demanded all HOA officers and their legal representatives to immediately cease all contact and communication with me until this matter has been satisfactorily resolved. Then she wrote that her opinion of their covenant restrictions regarding commercial vehicles appeared to be unfairly biased, unjustified, unwarranted, unlawful, and unenforceable when the vehicle is a popular unmarked sedan appearing to be an ordinary privately owned vehicle. Should you pursue this case in court, it will be easy to prove my client's vehicle is newer and more visually appealing than many vehicles being driven by other residents that are not being subjected to these restrictions. Then she included an itemized bill showing the much higher amount of money she was demanding the HOA pay for her legal services but included a copy of the bill from the HOA lawyer and deducted that amount from her invoice as a credit. Their lawyer called her a few days later and said the HOA officers have decided they will agree to exempt unmarked cars from the commercial vehicle restrictions in their covenant if we were willing to agree to a truce and neither side pursue the collection of legal fees. She agreed. Next one is titled, Snitching Neighbors. I got a ticket for my garbage can being left out too long. One trash day my family was out of town and I ended up working late. I got home about 9 p.m. and brought the empty can in and found a ticket on my front door. $50. Another day. We lived in a cul-de-sac and I went out the garage door to play kickball with my kids and some of the neighborhood kids. I just did the pitching, and since I was planning to be outside for a little while, I left the garage door open. We played about an hour and then went in the house for lunch and I closed the garage door behind us. Later I went outside and found another ticket on my front door. This time the ticket was for leaving my garage door open for longer than 30 minutes. It had the actual time I opened the garage door and the actual time I closed it on the ticket. It was a total of 56 minutes. Somebody had to have been watching when I opened the door and when I shut it and reported it right away. Then someone had to process it at the office and get it posted on my door within an hour. $50. That is some enthusiastic HOA thing. Another time, there was no street parking allowed for tenants. Tenants are only allowed to park in their garage or outside the complex. Near my townhouse there were, however, 4 visitor spaces. I don't think people in my cul-de-sac got many visitors because I never saw cars parked in these 4 spots. One Friday night, I was having a poker game and had invited 4 friends over to play. Of course, they parked in the visitor spaces. Next morning, I had 2 tickets for $50 each on my door. Turns out that tenants can only have their guests use a maximum of 2 visitor parking spots at a time. I get that HOAs try to keep the neighborhood neat, clean, and standardized. It was a good-looking property. However, these petty rules and snitching neighbors were more than I could take, so we sold our townhouse and moved to an even nicer neighborhood of single-family homes with no HOA. Expensive, but worth it. Next one is titled, HOA Harassment. We had an annual cleanup day scheduled for a Saturday morning, and all our junk to be picked up had to be at the curb by 7 a.m. I got my junk on the curb the day before late in the afternoon, after I got off work. Yep, you guessed it. The HOA tried to send me notice of non-compliance because I had junk in my yard. The HOA takes pictures but prints the notices to correct without being in color. If the violation is small, you can't really tell what the problem is. Once I got a weed violation, even though there were no weeds in my yard. They took a picture of my neighbor's yard and sent the notice to me. The funny thing is the neighbor had no weeds either. The guy that takes the pictures and sends notices, warnings doesn't live in our community. As a matter of fact, he doesn't live in the same town, or even the county. He will take a picture, and then send the notice a week later. You can tell because the picture is dated, and the postmark is a week later. The quickest letter I have seen is postmarked 6 days after the picture. Don't forget that the letter doesn't get to my mailbox until 3 days after the postmark on the letter. This means that at best, the warning is 10 to 14 days old. Once the guy sent a warning 2 weeks after the picture was taken. 2 days later, I got a notice that the violation had not been corrected. The picture was taken a week later, before he mailed the first warning. This was for a few weeds on the side of my house. I had already removed the weeds before I got the first warning, and some had grown back because of heavy rainfall. I was given a fine, but because of my home security cameras that clearly showed I removed the weeds before the violation was sent, I didn't have to pay. Finally, I got tired of the harassment and the complete ineptitude of the HOA enforcer. This guy was from a property management company, not a resident in the community. I emailed the HOA board, who are residents in the community, with details about how this guy was lacking in the skills of evaluating violations, lack of consistency, and unable to send warnings and violations in a timely manner. Guess who gets the emails sent to the HOA board? Yep, the guy that enforces the rules. He stated he would share my concerns with the board. Guess what? I have not heard from anyone on the HOA board. Last one is titled, Miss Walked the Property. I was living with my sister and her husband in their townhouse. One of the board members walked the property every day to look for infractions. She walked along the street, but she also walked behind every townhouse. The board was aware I was living there. When I bought a new car, I parked my old car, 1978 Datsun 280Z, in the extra parking spaces, which were out of the way, not near the townhomes. Plus, there were spaces for 15 to 20 other cars that went unused. My brother-in-law received a letter that my car was unregistered. My car was still registered out of state and it still had a valid registration. The license plate was under a car cover, so Miss Walked the Property was touching my car too. My brother-in-law went to the next meeting to let them know he was going to file a police report in case whoever lifted the car cover might have also vandalized my car. It wasn't vandalized and he wasn't going to file a report. A week or so later, the board came up with a rule that all vehicles in community parking spaces, not in garages, must be moved every 24 hours. Several homeowners complained, but the board ignored them. My brother-in-law was the only person to receive a warning letter and fine from the board. He went to the next meeting to explain I did move my old car every day but parked it back in the same spot. He then said he would happily pay any fee when the board produced the 24-hour video that proved my vehicle had not been moved. When they said there was no video, he smiled and then offered to pay the fine if they could produce the log and people who watched the vehicle 24 hours. Of course, they couldn't. They insisted the rule was valid and I was guilty of not moving my vehicle. I started reversing the car when I moved it, in the same spot. Head in one day. Backed in the next. Still not good enough for them. So, I moved it between two spaces. Left, right. Still not good enough. Now, my brother-in-law was angry since this was clearly targeting one person. The board lawyer was also not happy with the board by this point. He didn't say anything, but his tone was not pleased. So, every evening my brother-in-law would drive my car to the house of each board member, beep the horn several times, then move on to the next one. He did this for a week before he received a letter to stop. No fine. Just stop. He had his lawyer reply indicating he was on a public road and making sure the board members were aware the vehicle had been moved since they had not designated anyone to monitor the vehicles or have video covering all parking spaces. He continued making the board members aware my car had been moved every day. A week later, he got a letter saying they would waive the fine if he would stop. He replied that he would continue as long as the unfair and targeted rule could ever be used again. So, he continued. Another few days went by before the board announced the rule had been repealed. They never bothered us again. Thanks for listening.